Hello everyone, tonight we're standing on the weathered planks of a dock that juts out into Twin Lake. The air sharp with that metallic scent only fresh water seems to carry at dawn. The fog hangs low, curling lazily above the water, swallowing the far shoreline until it feels like the lake has no end. You're watching two siblings, Sam and Elise, hauling battered dive tanks from the back of a pickup, their breath puffing out in ghostly little clouds. A murder mystery has occurred, though no one is calling it that yet. And what you're seeing is the last morning anyone would ever lay eyes on them above the surface. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you really like what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're tuning in from and what you do when you're not listening to unsettling bedtime stories about people who vanish without a trace. Now turn off the lights, lean back on the soft cushions, and let's get into the action tonight. Sam's fingers tap on the metal tank valves as if he's impatient, but Elise is the meticulous one, checking straps, rechecking gauges, making sure nothing is out of place. They've been diving here for years long before the locals started calling the two connected bodies of water Twin Lakes. Officially, it's Lake Merrin and Lake Harrow, linked by a narrow, natural channel beneath the surface. Officially, neither has claimed a life in over 2 decades. Unofficially, well, that depends on who you ask. You can almost taste the tension under their easy banter. Elise teases Sam about his leaky wetsuit. If you freeze, I'm not sharing my thermal vest. And Sam fires back about her obsession with recording every dive for posterity. They've brought the GoPro rig again, the one that's seen more silk clouds and startled fish than daylight. There's a strange hush this morning, the kind that makes you notice every tiny sound, the creak of the dock, the muted splash of a carp breaking the surface. Somewhere a loon calls its voice, slicing through the stillness like a blade. If you've ever stood by a northern lake before sunrise, you know that kind of quiet. It's not peaceful, it's watchful. Historical records mention that in 1894, the Merrin logging camp kept a skiff here for hauling timber across the lake, but it capsized one night during a storm, taking 3 men down with it. The bodies were never recovered. Historians still debate whether the wreck lies in Merrin or Harrow, or if it somehow shifted through the channel between them. You might think that's a trivial century-old accident, but it's funny how often that particular story surfaces whenever divers go missing. A small aluminum fishing boat glides past in the mist, an older man at the tiller. He slows eyes the siblings, then keeps moving. Elise watches him a second too long. Sam notices and raises an eyebrow. Friendly crowd this morning, he says, but his voice is light. You can tell he doesn't mean it. As the sun tries and fails to burn through the fog, they finish gearing up. The lake looks calm, but the surface has that dull, glassy sheen you sometimes see before a storm. You get the odd feeling it's not reflecting the sky, it's reflecting something else entirely. There's an unusual detail the siblings laugh about before they step in a half-rotten wooden sign at the dock's edge, painted decades ago with the words, "No returns." The letters are faded, warped by weather, but still legible. Nobody knows who put it there, or why it hasn't been removed. The town's maintenance guy swears it predates him and he's been working here since the 70s. They shoulder their tanks, check each other's masks, and slip into the water one after the other, vanishing with a splash that's too small for the gravity of what's about to happen. You'd think they'd look back at the dock, at the truck, at the rising sun. They don't. And here's the part that catches in your throat. They were both strong swimmers, both experienced divers, both cautious to a fault. There was no reason to expect anything but another logged dive in their journals, another round of blurry underwater footage. But as they start their descent, The lake swallows them whole, and from this point forward everything you know about safety, skill and luck won't mean much. Somewhere beneath, in the darkness that lives between the two lakes, something waits, and the twins, maybe they knew it, or maybe they didn't. The first few feet beneath the surface are all soft greens and wavering shadows, the kind of dreamy light that makes you forget you're underwater at all. You can still hear the faint thrum of the world above, muffled bird calls, the hum of a distant motor, but it fades with every kick of your fins. Sam leads, Elise follows her GoPro rig, angled just enough to catch him in frame. A pale beam of sunlight spears through the water, catching motes of silt suspended like dust in an abandoned attic. Elise adjusts her buoyancy, letting herself drift for a moment. You might think there's nothing sinister about this, the quiet rhythm of diving, the gentle sway of lake plants in the current, but the Twin Lakes have a reputation for lulling people into forgetting how far down they've gone until they're too deep to turn back. 20 feet down, the water temperature shifts abruptly. It's like stepping from a warm shower into a walk-in freezer. Both siblings shiver inside their wetsuits, their bubbles rising in tight streams toward the dim surface. Sam taps his wrist gauge. Everything's normal, but Elise notices her ears popping harder than usual. It's a small thing, but divers talk about these moments later, wondering if they were warnings. Back in 1932, during one of the hottest summers on record, a heat wave drove dozens of locals into Merrin to cool off. 3 teenagers swam past the buoy line near the North Cove and never came back. Searchers swore they felt sudden pockets of freezing water wrap around their legs strong enough to cramp the muscles. Investigators still debate whether those were just natural thermoclines or something less explainable. Sam signals toward the channel mouth, a narrow ravine where the lake bed dips sharply. The silt here is darker, almost black, and the plants grow sparse. You can see Elise hesitate, hovering just above the drop, before following him down. Her camera catches a strange, pale shape wedged in the crevice wall, a smooth curve that might be a rock, or might be something man-made. She sweeps her light over it, and for half a second it looks like carved wood, but then the current shifts the silt, and it's gone. 30 feet down now, the channel's walls rise steeply on either side, like an underwater canyon. The light is weaker here, swallowed by the depth, and your field of vision narrows to whatever your dive light can touch. Sam keeps glancing behind them, and you start to wonder if he's checking for his sister, or if he's making sure nothing else is following. The current picks up not enough to fight against, but enough that you feel it tugging at your gear. Elise's GoPro catches odd flashes in the silt, little sparks of silver that vanish as quickly as they appear. Fish, maybe, or reflections from something buried. You remember the old logging skiff story and wonder if they've just passed over the wreck without realizing. At 50 feet, the walls open suddenly into the start of Lake Harrow's basin. Here, the bottom drops away into nothingness. The diver's lights barely scratch the darkness. Elise steadies herself, breathing slow, trying not to stir up more silt. Sam points towards something below, a faint, wavering glow. It's not the kind of light you expect underwater. It's too steady, too deliberate, like it's being cast from a fixed point. Elise tilts her head, and for a moment the glow seems to pulse. She raises her hands, signaling question. Sam just shrugs, but you can see his grip tighten on his flashlight. In the footage later recovered from Elise's GoPro, this is where viewers' freeze frames zoom in, argue in comment threads. Some say it's just an optical illusion caused by the water density and the way their lights crossed. Others swear you can see the outline of a structure, pillars maybe, or beams just beyond the fall-off. The divers hang there for a few moments longer before Sam gestures downward. Elise nods. They start their slow descent into the dark. They never resurface. And here's where it gets strange too. Other divers unrelated to the siblings were on Harrow that same morning. They surfaced around noon, claiming to have heard faint metallic sounds beneath them, like chains dragging across a hull. No boats were on the water at the time. Investigators still debate whether the sounds could have travelled through the rock shelf between the lakes, or if they came from something else entirely. By the time the siblings missed their surface check-in, the fog had rolled back in. The man in the aluminum boat, he was the last confirmed person to see them alive. He told deputies he didn't like the look of the lake that morning and left before noon. When pressed about what that meant, he just shook his head and said, "Sometimes it keeps what it's given." You'll want to remember that line. The call to the Marin County Sheriff's Office came at 1:43 p.m., placed by the rental dock manager. He'd noticed the siblings' wetsuits hanging over the rail earlier that morning, but by mid-afternoon their dive flag was still bobbing. In the same spot, no bubbles, no sign of movement, and no sign of the aluminum boat they'd rented returning to shore. You can picture the dock now, weathered planks slick with algae, the faint smell of gasoline from the storage shed, and that dive flag snapping faintly in the wind. The manager, a man named Curtis Hall, had seen his share of cautious divers who like to take their time. But something about this felt wrong. He told the dispatcher they've been down too long and the fog's coming back in. Within 40 minutes, the county's volunteer search and rescue dive team was loading gear into a battered Suburban. They'd been through Twin Lakes before, usually for lost fishing gear or the occasional drunken swim gone wrong, but diving in Harrow was different. The basin's depth meant they'd have to bring mixed gas tanks, more expensive, more complicated, more dangerous. The first team descended near where the siblings' buoy line disappeared beneath the water. Visibility was terrible. By 25 feet, the sunlight was gone completely, and every fin kick stirred up clouds of fine black silt. One diver later described it as swimming through printer ink. At 50 feet, they found the end of the buoy line severed cleanly, not frayed, not tangled, cut. Because that detail has never sat right with investigators. Lines do get snagged and break shore, but a smooth cut. That suggests a blade. And if you're down there with a blade, you're either a diver yourself or something is forcing you to cut free in a hurry. Meanwhile, up on the surface, deputies interviewed the few witnesses on the lake that morning. A retired couple fishing near the shallows claimed they'd seen lights under the water around 10 a.m., too bright to be sunlight and moving too slowly to be fish. Another fisherman swore he'd heard what sounded like someone knocking on the hull of a boat, but when he turned, there was no one there. Investigators still debate whether those accounts are signs of nitrogen narcosis in shallow divers, or if something else was happening beneath. The search continued through the afternoon, teams sweeping the channel mouth and the first ledge of the basin. They found nothing. Not a mask, not a fin, not even an air bubble trapped under rock. And here's the part that gnawed at everyone on the dock. The water around the basin remained unusually still, as if the lake was holding its breath. Back in 1956, another diver vanished in almost the same spot. His body was never recovered. The only trace was his dive slate, found days later wedged in the rocks 30 feet down. The message written on it, just 2 words, "Too dark." By the second day of the search, word had spread through Marin. Locals gathered on the shoreline, watching the rescue boats move in slow, deliberate arcs. Rumors started maybe the siblings surfaced somewhere else and got lost in the woods. Maybe they'd staged the whole thing for a stunt video. But the people who knew, Sam and Elise, said no way these two were meticulous, especially with dive safety. On the third day, a break, or what looked like one, came. A sonar scan picked up an anomaly at 70 feet on the basin wall. The shape was irregular with hard angles that didn't look like natural rock. The team marked the coordinates and sent down 2 divers with cameras. The footage they brought back is grainy, full of swirling silt, but there's a moment, just 2 seconds, where a structure emerges from the dark. It looks like a door frame, except it's far too large, and it seems to lean outward into the lake. The divers didn't get close. One of them later admitted he felt a pull in his chest, like something was urging him deeper. They marked the site for a return dive, but that dive never happened. A storm moved in that night wind, whipping the surface into whitecaps, making it too dangerous to launch boats. When the weather cleared 2 days later, the sonar scan showed nothing but smooth rock where the anomaly had been. Even now, people argue about that. Investigators still debate whether the shape was just a trick of the light, a temporary illusion created by silt and shadow, or whether something in Twin Lakes can appear and disappear on its own terms. Curtis Hall, the dock manager, quit his job a week later. When asked why, he simply said, "I'm not keeping watch over a place that chooses what it wants." And remember, those were his exact words. 4 days after Sam and Elise were last seen, the official search scaled back. On paper, the operation had shifted from rescue to recovery. Off paper, no one on the team wanted to admit they'd run out of leads. You can almost feel the shift in the air, where hope was still clinging by a thread. Now there was just the grim rhythm of routine sweeps, sonar drags and check-ins with the sheriff's office. But not everyone was ready to give up. Elise's roommate, Cara, drove up from the city that afternoon, bringing with her a waterproof notebook filled with hand-drawn diagrams. She claimed the twins had been planning something unusual for this dive, something they hadn't told anyone else. According to her notes, Sam and Elise were chasing a rumor about a submerged tunnel connecting the 2 basins of Twin Lakes, a passage locals insisted was impossible, sealed off by rock and silt decades ago. Cara pointed out something strange. In their planning sketches, a dotted line drawn beneath the basin wall, ending in a circle marked entry, the depth written beside it 92 feet. That's deep enough to make air management critical and well into the zone where narcosis starts to creep in. Deputy Moreno, one of the few on the case who'd grown up in Merrin, remembered hearing about that tunnel when he was a kid. Old fishermen used to say it was a mining bore from the 1800s, flooded when the shaft hit a natural spring. The story went that 2 miners went missing the week it was discovered, their lanterns spotted under the ice days later. But like most old stories, there was no paperwork, no photos, nothing you could hang your hat on. Still, Cara's notebook added a layer the sheriff couldn't ignore. If Sam and Elise had gone looking for that tunnel, and something had happened down there, the cut line discovery started to make more sense. Maybe they'd needed to free themselves from a snag, or maybe someone had helped them. The problem with diving in Twin Lakes is that you can't just go back and check. The silt swallows evidence fast, and the water's chemistry can strip metal clean in weeks. A dropped flashlight here could vanish without a trace. But Cara didn't seem fazed by that. She showed the deputies a small metal case she'd found in Elise's gear bag, a waterproof data recorder. The twins had apparently planned to clip it to their BC buoyancy compensator to log depth, temperature, and location. When the recorder was powered on, it showed only partial logs. The last complete entry was at 9:54 a.m. on the day they vanished, depth 91 feet, water temp 43 degrees. Movement slowly lateral drift east. Then the data stopped. No surface reading, no ascent profile, just an abrupt termination. Odd detail, the drift east note, according to every map, east at 91 feet should put them squarely against the basin wall. There's no open water there unless... Well, unless the old stories were true. Investigators and divers still debate whether the abrupt data stop was a simple equipment failure or the moment something physically removed the recorder. The case file doesn't say if they ever found the mounting strap. As night fell that fourth day, the shoreline crowd thinned. The sheriff's boat sat moored with its deck lights off the crew, nursing coffee and staring at the black water. Kara stood near the dock's end, hands jammed in her jacket pockets, eyes fixed on the spot where the buoy had once floated. She told Curtis in a low voice that she'd been having the same dream since Elise disappeared in it. She's underwater, but instead of bubbles rising from her mask, they're drifting sideways, vanishing into a dark opening in the rock. Curtis didn't ask for more details. The last thing you want standing on that dock at night is to start imagining doors in the deep. By the next morning, Kara had convinced one of the off-duty search divers to take her out to the coordinates herself. They left quietly, without logging it in the sheriff's records. They never found the tunnel, but the diver later swore that halfway through the descent, his dive light flickered and failed. Brand new batteries checked that morning. And when he turned to signal Kara, she was looking past him, eyes wide, as if something in the black was staring back. They surfaced within minutes, both shaken, both refusing to say exactly what they'd seen. In Merrin stories travel fast, especially when they don't have endings. The sheriff didn't hear about Kara's unofficial dive until 2 days later, when someone overheard her at the diner describing the eyes. She never clarified what she meant. Fish eyes, flashlight glare. Something else, but the word itself was enough to ripple through Merrin like a current. By afternoon, the lakeside parking lot was full of pickup trucks, and men who normally kept to themselves in the winter months were suddenly hanging around, swapping half-remembered tales about other people who'd gone missing in Twin Lakes. You can picture the sheriff standing there, coffee in one hand, the other, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Every small town has its way of circling a mystery. Some close ranks, others open their floodgates. Merrin's way was the latter. And in that chatter, details started emerging that no one had thought to mention before. One old logger named Grant recalled how 20 years back a pair of teenage brothers had vanished while ice fishing. He said the authorities called it a freak accident that they'd fallen through, but he swore he'd seen their lines pulled down as if something below had taken hold. The holes in the ice had been wider than a boot, perfectly round, and the snow around them was untouched. It sounded like just another lakeside ghost story until Curtis found a photograph in the town archive showing the sheriff from that era standing at the edge of the hole. And yes, the opening was round, smooth-edged, as if cut by machinery. That detail matched something Kara remembered from Elise's last message. If the map's right, it's perfect. No jagged entry. Investigators and divers still debate whether the old photo is proof of a recurring hazard or just an uncanny coincidence. But the timing, that's harder to ignore. The brothers vanished almost exactly 20 years before Sam and Elise did, both in late October, both near the same section of the East Basin. Meanwhile, Kara's data recorder clue refused to leave the sheriff's mind. If there really was a lateral drift east at 91 feet, then there had to be space to drift into. And if you combine that with the smooth, round openings in both cases, ice above, rock below, you start to see why some locals avoid fishing on that side of the lake entirely. The sheriff authorized a side-scan sonar sweep of the basin wall. It was the kind of decision you make quietly without issuing a press release because you don't want the whole town out there watching. The sonar crew worked under overcast skies, the wind biting through their jackets. Pass after pass, the screen showed nothing but the mottled contour of rock and silt. Until on the 6th run, a faint curve appeared. It was almost a perfect circle about 5 feet in diameter, set back into the wall. The image wasn't crystal clear. Silt distortion tends to play tricks. But to the trained eye, it was enough to know they weren't imagining it. The trouble was any attempt to approach that opening would stir up the bottom so badly you'd lose all visibility in seconds. You'd have to go in without seeing much more than the glow of your own light, knowing the silt could cut you off at any moment. Still, there was no shortage of volunteers. Merrin's divers are a stubborn breed, and maybe that's why the sheriff set the date for a controlled descent. 3 divers tethered to the surface with comms would drop to the opening and attempt a partial entry. Kara was on the dock when they launched, though no one invited her. She stood apart, jacket zipped to her chin, watching the bubbles rise in clusters drifting east. For 20 minutes, the surface team listened to the divers' slow progress through static-filled headsets. Then came a pause, a rustle of breathing. One of the divers, Dale, spoke voice tight. "There's something in there, looks like a wall of branches." No, not branches, the feed cut, not the whole comm line, just Dale's channel. The other 2 divers reported nothing unusual, said they were holding at the entrance, visibility almost gone, no sign of a wall. When they returned to the surface, Dale climbed out, last face, pale, refusing to elaborate. He wouldn't even look at Kara. That night, Curtis stopped by the diner for a late coffee and found Dale sitting alone, staring into a half-empty cup. Dale finally spoke, but not about what he saw. Instead, he asked if Curtis had ever heard the story of the Merrin gold, an unsolved theft from a river mine in 1892. According to Dale, the 2 miners who vanished in the tunnel, they were suspected of hiding the gold somewhere no one could ever get to. Curtis didn't answer. But in that moment, the missing divers, the tunnel, and the decades-old theft started to feel like pieces of the same puzzle. You don't sleep much after hearing something like that. Gold theft in the 1890s was the kind of thing people turned into folk tales, grimy lantern light, heavy sacks disappearing into the black. But Dale wasn't telling it for nostalgia. He was telling it because the miners vanished inside a mine less than 6 miles from Twin Lakes, and the last recorded direction of the shaft's expansion pointed roughly toward the East Basin. Now, no one in Merrin ever seriously connected the mine collapse with the lake. 2 different worlds separated by rock and time, but you start running the numbers distance depth and it stops being so easy to dismiss. The morning after Dale's odd confession, the sheriff pulled out the county geological maps. These were old, drawn in the kind of cartographer's script that makes you slow down to read every letter, and their faint pencil lines showed a projected tunnel expansion that, if ever finished, would have put the miners dangerously close to a natural limestone fissure. The maps didn't confirm if they broke through, but if they had, that fissure could have opened into, well, something like a chamber, or a sinkhole, or maybe, just maybe, a submerged vault. Investigators and historians still debate whether such a connection could exist. Limestone erosion is unpredictable and water flow changes over decades. But the possibility was enough to trigger a kind of fever in the small circle of people already obsessed with the diver's disappearance. Kara came by the sheriff's office that afternoon. She'd been quiet since the dive, but now she had a photo, grainy low light, pulled from Elise's old GoPro card. The timestamp matched one of their last logged surface intervals before the final dive. In the image, Elise is holding up a small, rust-colored fragment, edges rounded smooth. "Does that look like gold to you?" Kara asked. It didn't. Not exactly, more like brass, maybe bronze, but it was metal pulled from somewhere deep enough that corrosion had carved away any clear markings. Still, the sheriff remembered the oral history about the stolen gold being melted down and recast into crude ingots before disappearing for good. The story went like this after the theft. The miners split the gold into smaller caches, hid them in barrels and sealed them in whatever hideaway they'd found. Then the hideaway vanished along with them. Over the years, the gold became more legend than fact, blamed for every unlucky disappearance in Merrin. You can see how easily that would feed into Kara's theory. Maybe Sam and Elise weren't just mapping the lake they were looking for that vault, and maybe they found it. That's when Curtis made his move. He told Kara he had an old dive slate from a salvage job years ago with a scrawled sketch of the basin wall. At the time, he'd thought the circle in the rock was a collapsed cave. Now, looking again, he saw the faint outline of a second, smaller opening beside it, one that wasn't visible in the sonar image. You can imagine Kara's expression, determination mixed with the edge of desperation. She said she was going back down with or without the sheriff's blessing. The sheriff didn't like that answer at all. He leaned back in his chair, the springs groaning like they were trying to warn him, and told her, point blank, "People disappear in that lake, Kara. You've already lost 2 divers. You go down chasing a ghost vault, I'm not fishing you out." But Kara had already made up her mind. You could see it in the way she gripped the edge of the desk knuckles, white eyes, fixed somewhere beyond the map on the wall. It's the same look you've seen in old photographs of treasure hunters, half hunger, half defiance. Curtis agreed to help, but with conditions. They'd dive only to the depth Elise had last logged, follow the basin wall slowly and abort if visibility dropped under 2 meters. The sheriff wanted them to wait for a proper team, but Kara reminded him that if word got out, the site would be swarmed by outsiders in days. And outsiders don't keep secrets. The plan was to go at dawn when the lake's surface is flat as glass, and the only sound is the occasional loon call echoing through the valley. They packed spare lights, redundant air supplies, and oddly, a nylon gear bag big enough to hold something much heavier than seashells. That night, the wind shifted. You could smell rain in the air, sharp and metallic, like a warning whispered through the pines. Kara sat in her truck at the marina, staring out at the black water. She said later it felt like the lake was watching her back. She didn't elaborate on what that meant. There's a funny thing about these small-town legends. Every historical event gets braided into them eventually. One local even tried connecting the missing miners to the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York, claiming one of the miners' relatives fled east and took lake gold with them. Completely baseless, but it shows how far people will stretch to make the mystery bigger. Still a more plausible twist came from an odd scrap of info Dale dropped at the diner the next morning. He mentioned almost casually that his grandfather once worked on a crew that sealed off an unmapped shaft somewhere near the East Basin in the 1940s. Wartime rationing had made it unprofitable to dig deeper, so they simply flooded it. You don't need a conspiracy board to connect that to Kara's theory. A flooded shaft could explain the GoPro fragment, the sonar anomalies, even the miner's disappearance. But it also meant one more thing. Whatever was in there had been sealed under tens of feet of water for nearly 80 years. Kara's dawn dive would be the first to test if that theory held water. The air that morning had that cold early autumn bite, the kind that slips under your jacket and makes you feel more awake than coffee ever could. Mist clung low over the twin lakes like a living thing, shifting and curling in slow breaths. Kara zipped up her dry suit, her movements methodical, almost ritualistic. Curtis kept glancing at the horizon, as if waiting for the sun to show enough light to justify what they were about to do. You stayed on the dock, helping them check their gear, double tanks primary and backup regulators, reels for line. Every piece of equipment was accounted for twice. Curtis had even strapped a small waterproof recorder to his harness, just in case he'd said with that half-smile people use when they're pretending they're not nervous. They dropped into the water with barely a splash. From the dock you watched their dive lights flicker below the surface, growing fainter as they descended. The lake swallowed them quickly. By the time they hit 30 feet, they were nothing but soft glows drifting into shadow. You paced. It wasn't just nerves, something felt off. The loons had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Every few minutes you checked the dive clock, calculating how long they'd been under. 10 minutes in, Curtis's light stopped moving. It stayed fixed in one spot for several seconds before drifting slowly downward. Kara's beam, on the other hand, darted erratically as though she'd found something or something had found her. When they surfaced 23 minutes later, they were both breathing hard, steam rising from their masks. Curtis hauled himself up first, then pulled Kara onto the dock. She ripped off her hood and shook her head, water flying in sharp arcs. "We found it," she said, voice tight. "The shaft, it's real." Her description was unnerving, a vertical black void in the basin wall, wide enough for two divers to swim side by side, lined with timbers that looked far too intact for their supposed age. Her beam had caught a glint, deep inside metal, flat-edged, something man-made, but the silt was so thick one kick could blind them. They'd tied off a line and backed out before they lost visibility completely. Curtis swore he'd heard something down there, a dull, rhythmic thump, like someone knocking from far away. Kara dismissed it as his own heartbeat echoing in his hood, but you could tell she wasn't convinced. Back at the marina, Kara unrolled the line they'd brought up. At the very end, clinging stubbornly to the fibers, was a single brass button, smooth, heavy, and oddly warm to the touch even in the cool air. Brass buttons were common enough, but this one was engraved with a small, five-pointed star inside a circle. You'd seen the same symbol earlier that week on a warped wooden crate in Dale's storeroom, the one he claimed washed ashore after a storm in '79. That's when it clicked. Maybe the missing divers weren't chasing treasure for its own sake. Maybe they'd stumbled onto something older, stranger, and worth enough to risk not coming back. Historians still argue whether symbols like that star are purely decorative or tied to specific fraternal orders. But the last thing you wanted to believe was that Kara and Curtis had just put themselves on the same trail that Elise and the others had vanished following. Kara was already talking about a second dive, a deeper one. The following day, the mist over Twin Lakes burned off faster than usual, leaving the surface glassy and too still. That unnatural calm didn't feel like a blessing. It felt like an invitation. Kara and Curtis were both set on a second dive, their gear laid out like surgical instruments across the dock. You stayed quiet, but your stomach kept tightening. They'd spent the night mapping out a plan on scrap paper, angles, depths, signals, contingencies. This time they wanted to push inside the shaft, far enough to identify that metal glint Kara had seen. Curtis had rigged a stronger primary light and swapped in high-capacity tanks. Kara added a small underwater scooter, reasoning it could help pull them back against any unexpected current. It was strange, though, when you asked how they'd navigate the timbers, they just exchanged a look and said, "We'll figure it out." That's never something you want to hear before a dive. As they slipped into the water, the dock creaked under your shifting weight. You watched them disappear again, beams cutting neat white scars into the green-black water. Then they were gone, swallowed whole. You checked the clock obsessively. 10 minutes? 15? 20? At 23, your gut said they should have been back. It was Curtis who surfaced first, this time alone. He tore off his mask, his face pale, under the harsh noon light. She's—" He coughed hard, hauling himself onto the dock, hands shaking. She went in farther. "I tried to get her, but—" She kept going. His story was jagged pieces, missing like the film had burned in the projector. They'd entered the shaft following the line Kara had tied off yesterday. The timbers were warped in places, slick with some kind of algae that seemed to pulse faintly under their lights. About 30 feet in the tunnel widened into a chamber lined with debris, rusted tools, splintered crates, and more of those brass buttons. Then Kara saw it a shape tucked into a corner half buried in silt. Curtis swore it was a helmet, the kind used by deep-sea divers in the early 1900s. She started clearing it, ignoring his signals to turn back. That's when the silt erupted, blinding them both. Through the haze, Curtis caught a final glimpse of her light, and then it vanished. You didn't even notice your nails digging into your palms until you felt the sting. Curtis was already stripping off his gear, muttering about going back down with fresh tanks. You stopped him. "If you couldn't get her just now, you won't get her without a plan." Investigators and divers still debate whether going after a missing buddy immediately is better or worse in low visibility. Every second counts, but rushing in blind can mean 2 disappearances instead of 1. The marina owner Dale appeared like he'd been watching the whole time. Without a word, he handed Curtis a folded brittle map, one that showed the lakes as they'd looked in the 1930s before the dam project raised the waterline. On that map, where the shaft now sits, there was once a mining structure, and just below it in faint pencil someone had written, "Do not enter after September." No explanation, no signature. Just a warning that felt suddenly uncomfortably relevant. Curtis spread the brittle map across the dock, weighing its corners with wet gloves and a dive knife. You leaned over, careful not to drip onto the fragile paper, tracing the faint pencil scrawl with your eyes. The notation about September felt like a riddle you didn't want to solve. Dale wouldn't meet your gaze. He just spat into the lake and muttered, "Some things stay better off drowned." Kara had now been missing for nearly an hour. The surface looked so ordinary it was insulting sunlight scattered in shards, dragonflies hovering as though nothing beneath could possibly be wrong. Curtis was already swapping to fresh tanks, ignoring your pointed reminder about risk. He snapped back. "If it was you down there, she wouldn't be standing here arguing with me. Hard to fight that kind of logic, even when you know it's soaked in desperation." You both agreed on one thing: the map came with you. Dale claimed it had been left behind by a man named Roy Haskins, a geologist who'd surveyed the area in 1932. Roy had died the same year, supposedly after falling into one of the shafts. Historians still argue whether it was an accident or if the collapse was intentional to bury a hazardous find. Before Curtis could re-enter the water, you insisted on a safety line system, 2 lines in fact. One anchored to the dock and another to a floating buoy in case the dock cleats failed. Curtis grumbled, but complied, knotting them with that stubborn efficiency only divers and sailors seem to have. When he slipped under again, you kept your hands on the rope like it was a lifeline for both of you. Every tug, every slackening made your heart jolt. The minutes stretched in a slow, terrible accordion of hope and dread. 17 minutes in, you felt a violent jerk on the line, then it went utterly slack. You shouted his name into the empty water, knowing full well it wouldn't carry. Then, impossibly, the rope began to coil back toward you, slowly at first, then faster, as though something was hauling it from below. You braced your feet against the dock's edge, pulling back hard. Whatever was on the other end was strong enough to drag you a few inches forward. Finally, the surface broke, not with Curtis, but with the buoy you'd anchored as the second failsafe. Its line had been severed clean, the cut edges almost polished. Curtis was gone. "Behind you," Dale whispered. "It's September." You spun ready to demand answers, but he was already walking away toward the tree line. That's when you noticed the map was gone from the dock. Somewhere below, two divers now shared the same silent black water. You stand frozen at the dock's edge, gripping that useless length of severed rope, as if somehow Curtis might still be connected to it through sheer will. The lake has that glassy stillness that almost feels smug. It's the kind of stillness lakes get in horror films right before something bubbles up, but of course nothing does, not even a ripple. Just the steady hum of late summer cicadas somewhere in the distance, a noise so normal it makes you want to scream. Dale's footsteps vanish into the woods, leaving you alone, with an impossible choice: jump in after Curtis or call for help. But how do you call for help without sounding like you've lost your mind? Yes, hi, I've lost two divers to a perfectly calm lake, one of them my sister, and there was an old man with a Depression-era map who just stole it. Yeah, that's not going to win you credibility. You pull your phone from your pocket, 1 bar, no service. It figures. Twin Lakes always had dead zones, a fact you'd laughed about years ago on camping trips. Back then, losing signal was quaint, a chance to unplug. Now it's a lifeline you don't have. You start toward the trail, deciding maybe you can catch up with Dale, but just a few steps in, you spot something wedged between two planks of the dock, a metal tag, no bigger than a coin, covered in algae and grit. You pry it free and rinse it in the lake water. The number 47 is etched into it, along with a word in block capitals, Haskins, the same name Dale mentioned. Your mind flashes to the 1930s again. That year, Amelia Earhart vanished over the Pacific, a reminder that entire people could disappear without a trace, even with the world looking for them. But here you're not sure anyone's looking at all. The path through the pines smells like wet earth and resin. You half expect Dale to pop up from behind a trunk, grinning like this is some twisted local initiation rite. Instead, the forest swallows you in a green dimness, broken only by shafts of afternoon light. Then faintly, you hear the crunch of leaves up ahead. "Dale," you shout, and the noise stops. When you reach the small clearing, there's no one there. Just the map, folded perfectly, resting on a stump like a gift. Beside it, a small dive knife, its blade flecked with something darker than lake muck. You pick up the map. It's changed. Where before there had been neat, penciled notations, now one section near the deeper lake basin is circled in red, the words 6 left scrawled beside it. The handwriting doesn't match the neat script from earlier. This is rushed, jagged. Investigators and detectives still debate whether panic makes people reckless or sharpens their instincts. You're hoping for the latter, because right now you need clarity more than anything. You tuck the map into your bag and head back toward the dock, moving faster now. When the lake comes into view again, your stomach drops. There's a new object floating about 20 feet out, a scuba mask lenses glinting in the fading sun. You know whose mask it is. The mask bobs lazily in the water like it has nowhere urgent to be. You kneel at the dock's edge, reaching with the net from the boathouse, and snag it on the second try. The moment you lift it from the lake, water pours out in a steady stream, carrying with it a faint smell of silt and something older. Not rot exactly, more like the scent you get when you open a trunk that hasn't been touched in decades. It's Leah's mask. The inside of the strap still has her initials written in Sharpie, though the ink is faded from years of dives. You run your thumb over those letters, and it's almost like you can feel her laugh on the summer wind, short, sharp, mocking you for worrying so much. You check the dock for any sign of fresh, wet footprints, but see nothing. Whoever brought the mask here didn't come up the way a normal diver would. The lake is different now, not in color or sound, but in feel. The same way a house feels different after you find out someone died in it. It's psychological maybe, but your skin tightens all the same. You think of another historical mystery, the Mary Celeste found drifting in 1872 with all her crew, gone meals half-eaten, no signs of struggle. A perfect ghost ship. Twin Lakes is starting to feel like the freshwater version of that. The map in your bag is heavier somehow. You unfold it again, tracing the red circle around the deep basin. 6 left. That's not a depth marking, and it's not a date. Could it mean 6 people, 6 dives, 6 hours? Your thoughts are interrupted by the faint whine of an engine. You turn to see a small aluminum fishing boat drifting toward you, manned by a lone figure in a wide-brimmed hat. He cuts the motor a few yards out and just sits there staring. Lose something he calls voice, gravelly but calm. "My sister," you say the words, tasting both absurd and deadly serious. He nods once, like this is exactly the answer he expected. "Don't go to the basin," he says. "It takes more than it gives back." You step forward. What does that mean? But he's already restarting the engine. The boat swings in a slow arc heading toward the far shore. Over the hum of the motor, he shouts, "One last thing. Ask Haskins what happened in 47. The number on the metal tag burns in your memory now. You don't know if Haskins is a person, a family, or a ghost story, but you're starting to suspect they might be all 3. You watch the boat disappear, the sound fading until the cicadas reclaim the air. Then you hear another sound, low and steady, rising from beneath the dock bubbles, not the scattered kind from a fish or turtle, but a constant exhale, like someone's down there. You lie flat on your stomach, pressing your ear to the sun-warmed planks, trying to catch every nuance of the sound. It's rhythmic, deliberate, a diver's breathing pattern, which means there's either someone under the dock right now, or the lake is very, very good at faking it. The bubbles move slowly toward the shore, pausing every few seconds, then continuing. It reminds you of the accounts from the Franklin expedition in 1845, sailors trapped in ice-rationing air and movement until they vanished into Arctic legend. Historians still debate whether they died all at once or in a slow cascade of desperation. That same tight, hopeless feeling seeps into your spine now. You consider slipping into the water, but the memory of Leah's mask, dripping cold and not where it should have been, freezes you in place. Instead, you tiptoe to the shallows, scanning for signs, murky swirls in the sediment, broken reeds, anything. Something shifts to your right. At first you think it's just sunlight refracting, but then a dark shape glides under the surface, a human silhouette, slow and graceful. You step closer, and it suddenly angles down, disappearing into the deeper green. That's when you see it. The same metal tag number from the ledger, etched crudely into a flat stone at the shoreline. And beneath it, carved with the same shaky hand, property of the twin. No name, no date, just that ominous claim. Your skin prickles. The idea that the lake or something in it might own people isn't just creepy, it hints at a pattern, possession, recurrence. Like the way in 1947 that fishing trawler off Newfoundland returned, with all its crew gone, but the nets still raised another case that's never been explained. Investigators still debate whether it was weather mutiny or something no one wants to write down. The sound of bubbles stops, just stops. And in the sudden silence, a new noise replaces it, wet footsteps on the dock, slow and deliberate. You spin, heart pounding, but the planks are empty. Then from directly below you, a hand shoots up through the water and grabs your ankle. The shock sends you backwards so hard you land on the dockwood, biting into your palms. You scramble away, kicking at the water, but whatever grabbed you has already slipped back under, leaving only a widening ripple. Your ankle throbs, not from pain exactly, but from the cold. It's the same deep chill you felt when you touched Leah's mask. The surface of the lake looks deceptively calm now, like the hand never existed. That's the trouble with water. It's the perfect accomplice. It hides everything the second you look away. Just like those vanished Soviet hikers at Dyatlov Pass in 1959, where footprints led away from the tent but stopped abruptly in the snow. Investigators still debate whether it was avalanche infrasound or something stranger. You stay crouched for a long minute scanning the dock's edge. Nothing. Then you notice a trail of small, wet footprints across the planks leading toward the tree line. They're bare light and spaced almost too evenly, like whoever made them wasn't in a hurry. You follow, because of course you do, each step making the boards creak. The prints vanish into the pine needles, and just beyond them you see a flash of red fabric dangling from a branch. It's a torn piece of wetsuit, the same brand the divers wore. In the distance, something metallic glints in the sun. You approach, pushing aside low branches, and find an old diver's helmet, the heavy brass kind from the 1930s, propped neatly against a boulder. Inside it, resting where a face should be, is a Polaroid photograph. You pick it up. The image is overexposed, but you can make out two figures, both in diving gear, standing in knee-deep water. They're holding hands. One of them is Leah, the other has your exact face. You stumble back, heart thudding. Leaves rustle behind you. About time you showed up, a voice says your voice. You turn slowly because every horror film you've ever seen taught you not to, yet here you are. Standing in the dappled shade is you. Not a lookalike, not someone wearing a rubber mask, but you in the same clothes you're wearing now, same damp hair, same ragged breathing. The only difference is their eyes. They're darker, like the lakes. Silt has seeped into them. I've been waiting, they say, voice perfectly matching yours. You've taken your time. It's disorienting, like watching a live mirror that moves before you do. They tilt their head and gesture toward the helmet. That's where it starts. You ask the only question you can. Where's Leah? Your double smiles, but it's brittle. She's below, same as you will be. You shake your head, trying to piece this together. You think of the Beale ciphers, those 19th century codes, supposedly leading to buried treasure, one of which remains unsolved to this day. Historians still argue whether the third cipher is genuine or an elaborate hoax. Right now, your twin feels like that unsolved third page. You can read the letters, but they don't make sense in this order. They step closer. You match them as if pulled by invisible strings. The lake, they whisper, is not water. It's memory. It keeps what it wants, and sometimes it sends something back. The wind shifts and the air smells like the dock, wet wood and algae. Behind them you glimpse the trail of bare footprints again, but this time they lead both into and out of the water. You realize something horrible. Your double is dry from the knees down. They hold out a hand. Come on. If you want answers, you'll need to see for yourself. You glance at the lake. The surface has gone black, as if it's holding its breath. You step forward, though every sensible nerve in your body screams to run. Your double doesn't rush you. They just stand there, palm open, a mirror with patience. When your fingers touch the temperature, drop so sharply you feel it in your bones. It's not a handshake. It's a tether. The black surface of the lake ripples, but there's no wind. You're pulled gently at first, then with a strength that makes your feet leave the ground straight toward the shore. Your double walks with you stride for stride until you're both at the water's edge. This is the only way, they say, and their voice is almost kind now. You think of the Dyatlov Pass incident. 9 hikers in the Ural Mountains, 1959, found dead under bizarre circumstances. Some say avalanche, others whisper about infrasound or military testing. Investigators still debate whether any one theory can explain all the details. Right now, you're inside your own Dyatlov multiple clues, no cohesive picture. The first step into the lake feels like stepping into warm air rather than cold water. Your shoes don't get wet. The second step, however, is different. Suddenly your calves are submerged and the ground beneath is gone. Your double lets go. You sink, but it's not drowning. The lake swallows you with an almost ceremonial slowness. Shapes emerge below hulking silhouettes of sunken rowboats, a dock in pristine condition, and faces. So many faces. Some open their mouths as if to speak. Others watch you without blinking. Leah is among them. Her hair floats in the dark, her expression calm as if she's been waiting all along. You reach for her and the world goes silent. The last thing you feel is her fingers lacing through yours. Then everything fades, not to black, but to a soft, grey light. The surface of Twin Lakes remains still. Somewhere in the trees, a loon calls, and the sound echoes longer than it should. Oh, the scene lingers, but its sharp edges begin to blur. You're no longer in the cold pull of the water, nor standing on the shore, just floating in a quiet place where sound moves slowly and light arrives in soft waves. There's no fear here, only a strange, weightless curiosity. Shapes drift in the distance like paper boats in a wide harbour. They don't come closer and you don't need them to. Somewhere deep down, you understand that this isn't about finding every answer. It's about knowing when to stop asking the questions. The lake, with all its secrets, will keep what it wants. It always has. Maybe Leah is safe in her own way, in a place you can't yet follow. Maybe you've already joined her. Either way, the panic is gone. The shore is visible now, far away, and wrapped in fog. You can almost smell the pine, almost hear the low creak of the dock. But it feels less like a place you must return to and more like a memory you can hold without touching. Your breath evens out. The ripples slow. The light bends around you, soft and forgiving. If you listen closely, you might catch the faint hum of life above the surface, a boat motor somewhere, a bird taking off from the reeds. But they're distant, like the world is politely keeping its space while you rest. And in that space you finally do rest. The story has ended, but the mystery, like the lake, remains. End of script, sweet dreams.